West Hill United is a progressive spiritual community where how you live is more important than what you believe. West Hill United is a people, a place, an idea. We are a community living out of a progressive faith, striving to make a positive difference in our own lives, the lives of others, and the world. Join us Sundays at 10:30 a.m. or connect with us at any time.
Thank you very much, Scott. That was a Christmas treat for us today. Thank you. Today's readings. At the end of a reading, typically we say, offered as wisdom for the journey, and invite you, should you wish to do so, to say, maybe walk in its light. So our first reading today is by Rigoberta Menchú Tum, who is a K'iche Guatemalan feminist, activist, and Nobel Peace Prize Laureate. The quote that follows comes from her acceptance speech in 1992. She is known for advocating for the rights of Guatemala's Indigenous people and Indigenous people globally. She founded the country's first Indigenous political party, which is called Winaq, and ran for president in 2007 and 2011. Rigoberta wrote and said, "Our history is a living history that has throbbed, withstood and survived many centuries of sacrifice. Now it comes forward again with strength. The seeds, dormant for such a long time, break out today with some uncertainty, although they germinate in a world that is at present characterized by confusion and uncertainty." Our second reading is by Jessie Went, a journalist and broadcaster, and the BAM Centre for Truth and Reconciliation Summit moderator. She writes, "Sitting in corners, wringing hands and wondering what to do is not going to advance anything, including yourself. Read the calls to action, and as you go through them, one at a time, ask yourself, do I belong in this call?" Offered as wisdom for the journey.
May we walk in its light.
And over to Babette and Scott.
It gives me great pleasure to introduce Sarah Lewis to you this morning. Sarah is an Anishinaabe Kwe, or Ojibwe and Cree. Her ancestral roots are in Curve Lake First Nation in Ontario and in Pukatawagon, Manitoba. Sarah holds a Bachelor of Social Work from Trent University in Peterborough, Ontario. She has worked with numerous nonprofit organizations, youth and adult literacy programs, and aspiring poets in and around the Peterborough community. Sarah is a spoken word artist, activist, musician, community organizer, and mother. Sarah served as Peterborough's inaugural Poet Laureate and has been featured on CBC Arts, Global News, and stages across the world. Sarah utilizes poetry as an act of resistance, giving voice to Indigenous resurgence and reclamation of identities, culture, strength, and sovereignty. She encourages aspiring poets to speak their truth and to envision a decolonial society where sexism, the patriarchy, capitalism, and racism do not exist. Please join me in welcoming Sarah.
Hey. Hello. I wonder if we can turn off the, I don't know if there's any way to turn off the, sorry, the echo. Is there any on the phone? Just so I can hear myself. Like Is it not possible?
Just a second, Sarah. We're going to check in on that for you. Just 1 second.
Hello, this is the tech desk. Do you have multiple devices turned into Zoom?
Sarah, if your volume is down a bit, it will reduce the feedback.
Okay. Just as long as I can't hear myself. If you guys can, if that doesn't distract you or on Zoom, I'm okay. Just turn my volume down. Okay. I guess we're good then. Okay. Hello, my name is Sarah Lewis, and just want to make sure that people can hear me okay.
We can hear you in the hall. Can everybody hear Sarah on Zoom?
Okay, excellent. Okay. Yeah, it was actually making me tear up a little bit. I was getting emotional there. I was just even hearing it's interesting hearing your own bio or like when I hear it again. And I've just been reflecting a lot about, even the last 4 years and everything that has happened in my life that has led me to speaking in front of audiences and speaking to schools. And I was just thinking about it, and I have to owe all of this to my ancestors and to God and all those people or all of those spirits, in that other realm, because I couldn't have done it, without them. And I've often said, I feel like for the most part, I'm a conduit in all of this, or the messenger. And I'll get more into that after, but I just wanted to second. I do spoken word poetry, and I do a lot of work around the Peterborough area. I do work in Toronto as well. And as mentioned, I'm a mother. I have a little 4-year-old. So nice to get a little bit of a break this morning. And I just wanted to start off myself. I have a prayer, and I've been practicing it just recently, and it's called the morning prayer, and it's in Ojibwe, which is one of the languages that I have, and I'm relearning that. And I feel like that's a part of reclaiming my own culture. And we talk, we're throwing around this big buzzword, this truth and reconciliation word, and being able to speak my language and to reclaim that and share it in spaces is powerful for me. So I wanted to share this poem first, this prayer before I begin. Miigwech gejemnado, kin kina gigoga jetoyen. Miigwech nimishomis gizis gibawasiya jen nengom. Miigwech nokamis debik gizis gibawasiya jen yin debikag. Miigwech kashkimi kwa gimajiong. Bimadzawin gimajiong mijam. Gimajiong nibish gimajiong wisnyag. Minwa gimajiong niswin. Sama in the Bogdana Gwidnong Wabanong, Jaunong Minwa Epingishmog not emotion. Jimishko Gobwia Minwa Jizongadeon, Migwach Gejemnido, which translated means, thank you, Creator, for all that you have created. Thank you, Grandfather Sun, for shining on us today. Thank you, Grandmother Moon, for shining on us at night. Thank you to Mother Earth for giving us life, for giving us food, for giving us water, for giving us the animals, and for giving us breath. I offer tobacco to the north, east, south, west, to help me to stand strong and to have a strong heart. Thank you, Creator. So yeah, and miigwech to United Hill. I'm regretfully was unable to attend the first time around, but I'm so happy that I was able to make it out today and share with you all. And hello to everyone on Zoom and to everyone in the hall. So I was thinking about the title of, my talk, and it was originally we had planned to meet back in September, around National Truth and Reconciliation Day, and we had rescheduled it to December. And I was thinking, like, should I change up the title, like the subject of the speech? And I think it's perfect. I'm glad that we kept it at Truth and Reconciliation, because this is ongoing work. And I think it's important to note that, Indigenous people are Indigenous 365 days out of the year. And I think it counts to still speak about it and talk about these subjects. Many days, it's, like I said, it's ongoing work. And I think it's a fitting time as well from, what is happening across the globe in Palestine and how that connects to what has happened here and the effects that it had on our people. So I'm very grateful that I still get to speak about this. And it doesn't have to be obviously the truth aspect of it is hard, hard to talk about for as Indigenous people. And sometimes it can be a touchy subject. So, but a needed subject. That's how we move forward. There can't be any reconciliation without truth first. So I think that's important to note. And I always say, even to my Indigenous listeners or other folks who have experienced, the effects of colonization and genocide, to take care of yourselves. I have a smudge bowl with me, and, before I have these, sort of difficult talks, when I'm about to delve into some pretty heavy subjects, I have to smudge before I speak, or I smudge after, and it sort of, washes away those, it washes away any difficult emotions, and we use that as a practice in ceremony. So yeah, so moving onward, I really appreciate the land acknowledgement, and I speak about land acknowledgements a lot. And I think it's important that we do them, and to, not only do them, but to act after your land acknowledgements, which I appreciate United Hill doing, like getting Indigenous authors, getting Indigenous artists, speakers to come and speak at your gatherings is a part of reconciliation. And it moves beyond the land acknowledgements. And I've found that sometimes people use them as sort of a performative allyship, and to sort of show, hey, we're doing it and we're, supporting Indigenous people. But I think it's actions do speak louder than words, and it's important for what you do after those acknowledgements. So in saying that, I was thinking about the subject of truth and reconciliation, and I have some poems that I'm going to share with everybody, because although I love to speak on this subject and all subjects regarding, Canada's history and reclamation and all that, I'm a much better poet, and I feel like I can express myself better through art, as I'm an artist. But I wanted to preface, my poems with a little bit of like talking about truth and reconciliation, talking about my own story and how I got to where I am, and the activism and work that I do. So a lot of people ask me, especially on, National Truth and Reconciliation Day, folks ask me, like, what can we do? What can we do as allies, as settlers? And which I find interesting. So I think a key thing that we must do is listen. As simple as that sounds, handing the mic over. And listening to the stories. As mentioned, we can't have reconciliation without truth first, without hearing and feeling the uncomfortability. You know, I think change has never been created at tables of comfort. It's talking about having these difficult conversations that spark change. And, you know, as we work together, and especially with, you know, organizations and like churches, we especially have to be tender given our relationship and history with churches. It's not a great one. And so acknowledging that harm, you know, in any relationship that you are trying to heal, there is an acknowledgement of the harm that has been done. And that's a part of the truth aspect of truth and reconciliation. So I feel like that is key in moving forward. And I think, yeah, just like it really ties into a lot of our teachings. Our elders speak about, or have always talked about, this interconnectedness, that none of us are separate. We like to think of it as an Indigenous person's issue, that, you know, we were hurt so badly, which we were, but moving forward, you know, as spirits, as children, you know, of the universe and of God, like we are all interconnected. And I really love that phrase, you know, none of us are free until all of us are free. Really speaks to me. We talk about our connection to all of our relations, which means the sky, the water, the land, the air. You can't affect any of these things without it having an effect on us. You can't damage the water without it having an effect on the people. You can't frack into the earth without it affecting the people. And the same thing goes for community and even folks across the globe. We all share this interconnected spirit, I feel, and having empathy for one another and realizing that we're all in this together is important. It's not an Indigenous people's issue. It's a people's issue, what has happened in the past and what's currently happening, you know, across the globe. So, yeah, so when people ask me, what can we do? I always just refer them to the 94 recommendations. You know, that is key. And you can find little books. It's very easy to read. Instead of asking Indigenous people, like they told you, or they've written it down, you know, in a book. Survivors of, you know, residential school came together, and organizations across Canada came together and wrote down 94 recommendations. So if you pick one and you just nurture it and work on that, I feel like that is a step towards truth and reconciliation, and which is an interesting word. Our people didn't have a word for, we didn't have a word for reconciliation in our language. We had restitution or restoration, which means the restoration of something to lost or stolen to its proper owner. So when we talk about this land back movement, it's not simply like we want the land back. Obviously, some places that is the case, but we're talking about, it's even deeper than that. You know, we're talking about teachings and a way of life and the way that we're living, you know, in society. It's not the greatest. I find that we live in a very individualistic society where we've become very isolated and closed off from one another, where before we were we worked in community, we worked with the land, we were connected to the land, so we would never hurt that land, that water. And I feel like that's why we struggle today, because we're forgetting that everything is interconnected, and that's why we're hurting. We have to consider everything around us as kin, as our family. So trying to remember that and trying to bring those teachings back and listen to the elders, the knowledge keepers, and to do that, to apply that trauma-informed work in your own agencies and cultural competency. So in terms of what I have been doing, my journey and my contribution to, you know, my resurgence, my identity. I believe that, you know, I feel that we all have a journey, and a part of my purpose here was to use my voice. So it was interesting, you know, I got into spoken word poetry, or I would discovered it, sorry, back in high school. And, you know, back in high school, I was just learning about my own history. I was learning about my identity, which the teenage years are some of the most difficult times for that. And you know, I grew up on two different reservations, as mentioned before, Pukatawagon. I've never actually heard anyone pronounce that correctly, so good job, I think, to Ruth. But so when living on these reservations, you know, I witnessed so much addiction, so much alcoholism in my family, and I seen it everywhere. You know, I didn't really understand because I didn't know the history of colonization. I didn't know the history of residential schools and what had happened. So I grew up with a tarnished view of my own identity, of what it meant to be Indigenous. I was ashamed, and I didn't like the color of my skin. I had internalized that racism that I had experienced, you know, when I was living in Ontario. There was a lot, like, I wanted to be white, or at least I felt very uncomfortable in my skin. And I had seen the alcoholism surrounding me. I'd seen the drug addiction. I'd experienced the violence. Because, you know, as they say, hurt people hurt people. And that was definitely the case in Pukatawagan. You know, it was very violent. Our house was getting broken into all the time. I was, yeah, I had been assaulted numerous times. I'd experienced all of it. And more than anything, I was shocked at the mental health and how it was affecting the youngest people in our community. Children who were, you know, 11 years old were committing suicide. And sorry, I guess I should have gave a trigger warning ahead of time, because I'm going to be talking about some difficult subjects. So please take care of yourself if you need to step away or anything like that, or I'll try to keep it low key-ish. But so that was happening, and I wanted to leave my community so badly. I was like, we're all, you know, we all suffer, and I had no idea why. And on top of that, you know, I had gone to a school where it was mainly Indigenous youth from all over Manitoba. And what I was noticing was, when we were coming back from the Christmas break, that some of the girls that I was going to school with were not coming home, or were not coming back to the school after they came home from Christmas break. One of them being Leah Anderson. And I was starting to notice a trend that, you know, the Indigenous girls, a lot of them were going missing around me, and a lot of them their bodies were being found, and they were being murdered. And then I learned about my Auntie Teresa Morasti, who was found on across there's an infamous highway that spans from Prince Rupert to Prince George, I believe, and it's called the Highway of Tears. Very fitting. It's a highway that women hitchhikers have historically hitchhiked across and have went missing, or were found along this stretch of highway, which is considered a dead zone. There's no cell phone reception. It's very, you know, there's no towns along it. And so a lot of women were showing up missing or murdered, and my auntie was actually found along that. And I was in awe about everything that had happened. I was like, why is it? And it seemed more prominent the more north you went, and the more isolated you went, or out west. It is more, I find it is still prevalent here in Ontario. It's just a little bit more hidden and within like these within the communities, but it is more urban here in Ontario. So I feel like you don't experience, well, at least I have not experienced it as much. So out west, you know, all of these things were happening, and I had attended a workshop there was a speaker and a poet by the name of Zacchaeus Jackson who, you know, I have to credit him introducing me to this medium of expression. He was an Indigenous man who was from Vancouver, and his story blew me away. You know, he lived in the downtown east side of Vancouver, which I don't know if anyone is familiar with that area, but it's just a stretch of, you know, homeless folks in the downtown east side of Vancouver, and addiction is very high there. So he had shared his story about his addiction and about, you know, his experience living on in his community and what that meant, what it meant to be Indigenous, and also the strength and hope and how he got out of that and how he was reclaiming his identity. And he spoke it in such a eloquent way that it just blew me. But like, you know, at the same time, it was very powerful and intense because those were intense subjects. But the way that he spoke it, it blew me away. And I remember, I think I was, yeah, grade 11. And I was just remember thinking like, I want to do that. I'm like, whatever that man is doing, I'm like, that's what I want to do. I'm like, feel like I have a voice, or like I need to say something like about what I've seen and what I've experienced. And I never knew how to put it into words. For the longest time, I felt so silenced, you know? And I think that's an intergenerational side effect from colonization. You know, we've been a silenced people for millennia. Our voices have been shoved underneath the rug. And that, you know, that was passed down through my family. And that's the way I'd felt. And for like the first time, I was like, I want to use my voice. I need to use my voice. And I had a push to do that. And so I listened. I listened to that voice, and here we are today. So all I would say is I'm grateful. I always, yeah, again, I always have to credit creator and, you know, my grandmother, because my grandmother, you know, she went to residential school, and the effect that had on our family was felt through all three generations. So it was my great grandmother that went, and it's crazy to think about. I was told that, you know, women, we are carried in the womb of our grandmothers. So in that, you know, in that egg, and we experience in that egg what they experienced. And so no doubt I have this passion, and I used to think about residential schools and what that meant, and I have this drive to talk about it and use my voice. So yeah, anyways, that said, oh right, I was talking talking about my story. Sorry, folks. It's a Sunday morning. I was mentioning to John that I don't typically speak Sunday mornings, especially after I've sort of checked out once the weekend hits. But so yeah, it's brought me to where I am today, and I'm very grateful and honored. As mentioned before, I even went to Brazil, and it was crazy. I never would have thought that I would have went there for poetry. So if anyone tries to tell you that art won't take you places, don't listen to them. My voice and my story has made it across the world, and where I got to connect with the Indigenous people in Brazil, and they share the same story. You know, we've had the same hardships of what has happened through colonization, and we were talking, and we were voicing through poetry almost identical experiences, you know, just in different places on the globe. So I wanted to just jump into a poem just to give you an idea of what I'm even talking about when I say spoken word poetry. And I'm going to share this one poem. It's called Warrior Cry, and this poem I dedicated to the matriarchs, you know, the women in my life. You know, these are the women who have inspired me to be the woman that I am today and to be the mother that I am. And I was speaking with somebody, I think his name was Ken, but he actually has worked here in Curve Lake with my grandmother, Rita Rose, who, she is a avid churchgoer. And this is an ode for those women. So anyways, this one is called Warrior Cry. I'm the warrior cry that penetrates, swings, slings through your House of Commons window. Not uncommon in my bloodline, though. I'm the high priestess, the empress, grabbing glass ceilings on my way down, turned into a floor, turned to powwow grounds. I dance and stomp on top of shreds of the 1763 Royal Proclamation buried beneath my feet. Jingle dresses and fancy shawls sweep the red-crusted floor. I crow hop, stop, and point to every door, evicted of opportunity, every timeline, every generation eradicated. Here is where I stop and pray. I see my own fractured lineage covered up with a Band-Aid branded reconciliation. My moccasins reveal the mess you made crammed onto reservations. Crucifixes and crying eyes disguised as and covered up as a friendly Thanksgiving dinner get-together. A dinner reservation we did not make, had no choice in the matter of, painted as a special seat by the door and told to leave before the main course. Leftovers presented on a gold-plated platter and advertised as the special. Starved of culture, freedom, love, life, our children, our world. How special. But my ancestors unshackle us daily, have prayed for us for millennia. I am your Notre Dame turned to flames, the fire starter that won't get out of the house that shamed her, a ceremonial smoke medicine flavor, healing yet spicy. A lyrical physicist transcending truths through time and spaces that I now take up. A felony if you dare touch me, burnt hands will remind you that my blood still boils. And line acknowledgements aren't going to fix that, because acknowledgements without change is like sorry without action. Assaulting the land and bodies of water is an attack on Indigenous women's bodies and communities. This is forced entry to our life givers. Indigenous women nurture our future, feed our babies with ceremony, babies that grow because of places like Pigeon Lake, the same place where cottagers protest our wild rice monomen for being too thick along the shores for their water skis to get through, of course. The irony of their anger, having something taken away, as though their water sports trump our livelihood and survival. You scream bloody murder and I scream privilege. Tired of being labeled radical because I want clean drinking water for our communities, for Indigenous women and men to be alive, to thrive, yet we're devalued by the blue lives that promise us safety. Tired of being punished because of pigment. But I digress. Indigenous women, the backbone of the body we've abused, holding us together in this rusted, gated, concrete-fused skeleton. They always call me back to my purpose, my power, my body that's been displaced, my home. I forever owe debt to my grandmothers, mothers, aunties, sisters, and friends. So this one's for you, Miigwech. So I like starting with that one. That was one of the first poems that I actually published in through CBC, and it's an older one, and my work has evolved still. And I wrote a poem recently, and I'm going to share it with you folks. You'll be the first to hear it. I had just been inspired, to write something in honor of the children in Gaza and the ones, the folks who are suffering at the hands of imperialism and colonization, all the things that are happening, in the Middle East, which connects to, as I said, none of us are free till all of us are free. And, there was a genocide that had taken place here in Canada. And to dismiss that on other parts of the globe is also complacency. And, we have to stand together, even if we are far in these imagined borders that we've created. So you'll be the first to hear that poem, which is very fitting. There's a rally actually happening today in Peterborough that I was potentially going to check out after this if I'm not feeling too tired. But anyways, all that said, I also wanted to mention, because we are a different people and we come from different cultures, I was reflecting upon, other Indigenous knowledge keepers that I have come across in, even academia, in training that I've done through work. And it's important to note that because we are different, we speak differently. And sometimes you might notice, even when you listen to elders, it makes non-Indigenous people very uncomfortable. Sometimes the way that we talk, the way we talk is very slow, and there's a lot of pauses, and it makes people uncomfortable to have these silences. And another thing that you have to consider when you're working with Indigenous elders, with Indigenous speakers, is this difference in language and speak. And considering that when we're talking about truth and reconciliation, I just bring it up because my partner had recently attended a trauma-informed conference for his work, and this has happened, in my schooling experience, but it really threw people off how maybe unscheduled the Indigenous teachers were, or it might have appeared unorganized to them, or maybe they would have a thought and they would trail off for a little bit and go on a tangent, and then they would come back to it. It's like, and that's the way we think, we think in a circular way. When we think about the medicine wheel, it's a circle and it's not linear. We're not very a structured, scheduled, on time. Time doesn't work that way to us. We think in a circular formation. So just considering that, when working with future Indigenous elders, because I grew up in academia and school, I was everything was so structured, and everything was, in little boxes, and we're checking boxes, and we're marking, and we're scoring on these tests, and we just don't think that way. We don't it's not the way we measure knowledge. And also, when we share these teachings, it was all orally. And I think that's why I connect to spoken word so much as well, is because that's in my bloodline, to share orally and to tell stories. Or we were storytellers, and we would tell these stories around the fire. So yeah, with that being said, I'm going to share another poem. This one is called, just on the topic of, resurgence of culture and language and all that. This one is called My Languages. When I hear my languages, my body would shake like an unearthed scroll buried in treasure chests, buried beside the rosary of a priest. Tears would feast on cheeks, swell eyes, as if my blood memory heard its child speak after years of no contact. Dealing with the loss and grief of having her taken away, dealing with the loss and grief of having her taken away by men of God, ripped from her tongue, the messenger of traditions, teachings, and love for everyone. My bloodline carries two languages, Ojibwe and Cree, a mouth that has tasted more blood than bone, more ash than stone. To grow up not knowing your language is trying to explain to your therapist a grief for something you never had in the first place. When I hear my language, I feel like an imposter. My language even sounds wrong to say, does not feel like mine when I don't speak it the way my kokum did. The way she only spoke it when she was drunk, only felt safe to be herself behind the veil of chemical and stale smoke-filled closets. And yet, there is not enough whiskey to forget what happened. There is also not enough whiskey to forget the language. She's mighty. Even when we forget, she remembers. I hear my language, a distant memory of my kokum-picking wiggies, boiling the medicine tea. It is jealous, waiting for me outside my school hallways as they shove French down my throat, declare it a mandatory class when my language isn't even an elective, when they play O Canada on the intercom, converted in my language, a sort of performative allyship that has sailed. Tell me to stand for the very country that stole that very language from us, your home on native land. My teacher asks me why I don't stand for this anthem of angst. I tell her that my ancestors would turn over in their unmarked graves if they heard this. But my language is an escape artist. She escaped exile and execution. She hid in my abalone shell, in our medicines and sacred fire, in our ceremonial circles. She hid in the child who attended residential school, who would die before they forgot who they were. She hid in our rivers, our trap lines, our brown bodies, our throats trembling, buckling when she rumbles and roars through abused canal that has been taught to hold tongue, to bite tongue. Still hoping that coercion had not won, but my mother tongue reunited with her child today will continue to do so tomorrow and again and again. So I cry and I shake. I hold my breath to keep her a part of me for as long as I can. She helps me remember. I exhale and she says, K'iche Anishinaabe Kwe Gizagan. She's coming back to take us home. Oh, how I've missed her so much. So as I'm reclaiming my language, that one was very important to me because I often used to cry when I would hear my language, when I would hear the elders speak it, because I think deep down my blood memory would remember the language, even though it had been lost, even though it had been forgotten. Through my grandmother, she was told not to teach us because it wouldn't do us any good. It would just make our lives worse. So she internalized what they had said to her, and so because of that, we missed out on learning that language. So I would get emotional when I would hear it, when I would hear the elders speak it. And they say that when you hear your language, and you get emotional, that's because your ancestors are calling you back home. And that's been a really important healing part of my journey. I'm going to share, so a poem. So although I talk about Indigenous issues and I talk about truth and reconciliation, and also, like I said, it's connected to women empowerment. And when we hear the stories of women and when we amplify their voices and lift them up, that is also what truth and reconciliation means to me. And I'm more than just, I'm many different things in my role aside from a poet and a mother. And so I wanted to share another poem with you, and I find that the women always often love this one. It's for them, and this poem is called Divine Woman. Divine woman, rest your weary eyes and worries. Set them aside, woman, for an older version of yourself to worry about. You are welcome to step off of the pedestal they have placed you on. Breathe, release the tension in your shoulders, neck, back. The battles will always be there, so unclench your fists and place hands into prayer pose and thank yourself for how hard you have worked to get here to this moment. Divine woman, super kind of woman who doesn't take too kind to people who tell her to be kind and neat and smile, please, when she grinds in these capitalist streets so she can feed her babies, who is working so hard to love herself after decades of unsolicited advice, woman who is called every objectifying name in the book, but returns the book to its owner, has never been much of a fiction reader, woman, loud woman. Not a fembot plot twist and twerk and bend for you fantasy, living to appease the male gaze, lying naked underneath willow tree, docile, sweet, submissive, whispering, never yelling, cooking, never burning bridges. Expected to do it all, woman. but she doesn't feel full off these capitalist calories. She has a hunger for community, for connection, was born in a system that fed her lies. She's a more than enough woman, yet they gave her a manual on how to be a good, real woman. They want to pluck and wax off all her realness, put her on a diet, tone her voice down, but she knows she's a goddess, and no goddess would dare remove parts of herself, make herself less goddess-like. Divine woman, beautiful mind, woman, not a forget-me-not, but a woman you remember. She is the whole fire, not just the embers kind of woman. Her body's cells are derived from pre-colonial contact, cannot be owned or told what to do. Her parts are not a reference point for abuse or patriarchal profit. She's a prophet of poetry, of self-love, of raging against the system that covers her breast as if it exposed its secrets, makes them uncomfortable seeing it in a baby's mouth, but not if it's wrapped in Victoria's Secret. But divine woman knows that to heal from the patriarchal melting pot is to get out of the pot, is to stir the pot, knows that it is not enough to say sorry, or not all men, is to unlearn sexism rooted in colonialism, is to provide reparations, is to love our women, to respect all women. That's trans women, disabled women, gay women, straight women, fat women, skinny women, loud women, quiet women, masculine women, sexual women, asexual women, not your women, Black women, Indigenous women. To acknowledge your existence is because of women. This is for the women who want to have kids, the women who don't, the married women, the women who won't, the poly women, working moms, moms that don't work, the women who wear makeup, and the ones that have made up their minds that their freckles are too fine to cover. Not hard to find woman, because she's listening to this poem right now. I see you, divine woman. And so please stop placing her on a pedestal. She will always desecrate it, set it to flame. She exists to exist and doesn't need to make it pretty. She isn't merely a vibe, but a whole frequency that radiates love, magic, womanhood, and divinity. Thank you. So that poem I actually wrote for International Women's Day, and yeah, it's just like I love to encourage and empower women, you know, to speak up in whatever you're passionate about. You know, I'm passionate about a number of things. Obviously a lot of Indigenous related issues and people's issues, you know, as humans. So I like to empower women to use their voice in whatever capacity they would like to. So anyways, with that being said, I just wanted to circle back around. So I've more than anything, you know, I'm on my own healing journey right now. It's a continual healing journey. I'm nowhere near the to the end of my journey in terms of learning about this crazy magical place that we call Earth. And a part of my journey has been, you know, you know, with colonization and with the things that happen, you know, the way my people coped was we were given alcohol, and that's the way we numbed because there was so much trauma, you know, so much pain. And I had experienced that, and I have dealt with addiction myself, and with alcohol and drugs, and it's been an ongoing battle for most of my life. And I'm just reaching a point where that is not, it is no longer, you know, a part of my, a part of who I am as a person. And I'm so forever grateful for that. And I feel like a lot of that has to do with my connection to spirit and connection to, you know, like I said, all of it is connected. And I just wanted to tell you a quick story. So when I was pregnant with my son, I had went to this fair, and this there was a bunch of booths in this area, in this like sort of convention, this fair type of thing. And something had told me to go to this fair. It was interesting. So I went, and, you know, as I was leaving, this woman she came running up to me, and she said, look, I I need to tell you something. She's like, I'm a bit of a medium, like a psychic. I can connect with the other side. And she's like, and I just want you to know, she's like, you've got thousands of ancestors. She's like, and I don't want your money. I don't want any of that. But she's like, I need to tell you something because they're asking me to tell you, but you have thousands of ancestors behind you, and they're guiding and supporting you. And she's like, and I don't know what you do for your job, but she's like, your throat is lighting up, but they're saying you need to use your voice. Whatever you do for work, you need to keep using your voice because it's telling their stories. And in telling their stories and talking about having these conversations, I feel like it honestly sets them free as well from all that pain and trauma that has happened. So I had no idea what she was talking about. I was, at the time I wasn't even doing poetry. I was like, oh, that's great. I went to school for social work. So I was like, maybe that connects somehow. Maybe that correlates with that. But it only dawned on me, this whole experience that had happened like a few years ago. And I was reflecting on where I am today. And I was like, she was right. It just as what has happened with my spoken word poetry and like becoming poet laureate and all that, I that happened on account of the ancestors and creator and stuff. And I feel like I said, I'm just the messenger for them and the messages that they want to get out there. And it's crazy how connected we are to spirit and to spirit world. Even my father, my late father, he had passed away 2 years ago from cancer. And this can be such a tough time. Christmas can be a tough time for people who don't no longer have a loved one with them, or who has someone who has passed. And it brings up a lot of grief. And it's been so healing, understanding that we are still connected through spirit, and that even though he's not here in his physical form, he is in spirit, and I often feel his guidance and support. And it's interesting, when I ask for signs, because I'll ask for signs from my dad, and he shows up as the porcupine. When we had put his headstone up, a big porcupine came and walked over to my dad's headstone, or his gravestone, and nobody else is in the graveyard, and like was looking at us, and me and my mom were like, that's dad. And anyways, there's just been a number of occurrences where he shows up as a porcupine, and I'd asked for a sign because this is a time of grieving for me. It comes up a lot. And I had said, Dad, please give me another sign, literally 2 days ago. And yesterday I was speaking to this woman, and I shared with her this story, and she had said, it's so funny that you mentioned the porcupine and just what you're telling me right now. She's like, I used to live in a town called Porcupine, and my brother got a tattoo of a porcupine on his arm. And I was like, what? No way. Like, if you ask, you just have to ask, and you can connect through spirit. And I guess it was meaningful to me because porcupine represents protection and, support. And that's exactly what I was asking for. But anyways, all that to say, we're all very connected to spirit and to our loved ones and to each other. And even those kids who went missing or who died in residential schools, I often feel that they are connecting through me and the work that I do. And that urge to have these gatherings such as Truth and Reconciliation, you're doing a service to them. And I know that they really appreciate when people remember them and honor them, and they're trying to do something towards the future generations, that, the survivors of residential school. And that's a part of one of our teachings is, we call it the seventh fire, and we got to think about the 7 generations that come after us. So all the actions, all the things that you do has a ripple effect on your on those 7 generations. And so you got to think ahead of you, the seven generations ahead of you, and you got to remember the ones behind you as well. So anyways, with that being said, I have I've got a lot of story and a lot of thoughts, and definitely not enough time to fit into an hour, but I just wanted to say Chimigwech for listening to me. And yeah, I am very grateful to be able to have any sort of platform to share my story, to talk about these important subjects. I'm going to close just with one more poem, and I don't know if we have time for questions or comments or anything, or if John wants to do that, but I'm just going to close with the new poem that I said I was going to share. So just in connection with our kin that are across the world, this one is called A Repetitive Poem. A repetitive poem, a repetitive poem, a repetitive poem, because history keeps repeating itself. Self, let me introduce myself. My biography is located on the back of your history books, buried in bridge, buried in spine. My back aches, has carried this nation's secrets to my grandmother's grave. It reads, daughter, mother of an attempted genocide, you can't be complacent about genocide. A repetitive poem, a repetitive poem. Poetry is political, political voice is political, is dangerous. If I was across the world right now saying this poem, I would die. We kill people like we kill flies. Gijemnado, blow bomb smoke into abyss. Wrap my sage smoke around babies like blankets. We wrap prayer around bodies across borders, from Gaza to Congo, back to Canada, underneath parliament buildings. If your nation was built on the graves of children, you're unevolved, unenlightened, unelevated, uninvited to the tables that govern our bodies, low vibrational beings. To share the experience of genocide on your people, your children, is not something I ever want to share. I don't want to break bread with these babies. I want to throw it out. I want to burn it, burn the flags of these so-called nations to warm the hands of these babies. These babies, some will have tasted blood before they've tasted their first fruit, their first food. A malnourished youth went to bed to the sound of explosions before lullabies and mama's eyes. Bullet casings as beds. This is not a metaphor. This is real. This is real. A repetitive poem because we are not the same. My people do not fight over imagined borders. Gijemnado. I cry, but my tears won't save them. More salt to wound, insult to injury, Indian, they said. Leave your homelands, they said. It's God's plan, they said. A repetitive poem, because they can't seem to get it through their heads, because at one point the only good Indian was one that was dead. Funny to them, we're having a powwow, they said. Tomahawk chop with mascots, a funny song, a Disney song, insult to injury, insult to this Indian. I think about the intergenerational pain that will pass through each bloodline, rivers of blood with their people swimming in it, each scar that will draw a map back to their homelands. Therapists will ask, where did they hurt you? They will point to scar everywhere. They destroyed and took everything. And then ask those same kids to stand for their national anthem. We'll call it Thanksgiving. We'll argue and preach freedom. We'll include your land acknowledgement and call it a day, forgetting that none of us are free till all of us are free. And they will resist through poetry, art, policy, prayer, pens to paper, protests, politics. And they will grieve all over again. Will reclaim their loud, their lands, their culture, their voice, their proud. And we will all grieve again because it could have been avoided. A repetitive poem because history keeps repeating itself. Self, let me introduce myself. Better yet, let me repeat myself. Science shows repeating an act builds a habit, something that stays with you. So maybe if we keep begging them to put down their weapons for Gaza girl, Congo boy, and Anishinaabe Kwe, they'll listen. Thank you, everyone, and miigwech to United Hill for having me. yeah, I hope you all have a wonderful Sunday and rest of your weekend.
Sarah, don't go away.
Become a sustaining champion of West Hill United's work by committing to an automatic monthly donation. Learn more or donate now through Canada Helps.